sooner or later, news media will run out of other people's money to spend. Give the CBC $150 million and it's a commercial competitor, you're actually tilting the playing field against non-CBC competitors. The public doesn't see them as independent anymore.
For years, Canadians have been told that taxpayer funding is saving journalism. But a veteran media executive with decades inside the industry just told Parliament the opposite. That growing reliance on government money is eroding trust and the very perception of independence. Hearing Conservatives say this is one thing. Hearing it from someone who spent a lifetime inside the same system is something else entirely. Let's take a look.
By now, you've been informed by several people that the health of many news organizations in Canada is poor. The situation is, if the mounting requests for subsidies are anything to go by, even more dire than it was in 2018 when publishers first convinced the government to get involved. That might indicate that while current solutions have provided hospice care for several companies, most journalists are now reliant on the corridors of power they are expected to patrol on the public's behalf. Unless significant changes are made, that dependence is only going to grow stronger as the list of organizations asking for more money grows and grows. As it does, the playing field for the news industry will continue to be unstable and its content viewed with increasing suspicion. That, in turn, will suppress investment by innovators looking to create new, independent, and sustainable 21st century appropriate platforms. That has been the pattern since 2019 when the temporary 5-year journalism labor tax credit for newspapers was introduced. Enhanced in 2023, it is now in its 8th year. The Local Journalism Initiative, initially announced as a 5-year $50 million plan in 2019, also continues enhanced. The CRTC, meanwhile, is working on more financial support for broadcast-based news, while the CBC, the nation's largest employer of journalists, has received an additional $150 million. Then there's a $100 million Google fund, which partially offsets the loss of revenue created when Facebook was lost as a delivery platform. And of course, the Canada Periodical Fund. It adds up to a lot of money. But sooner or later, news media will run out of other people's money to spend. So this is a good time to pause and reflect upon whether current approaches are achieving the desired public good outcomes, what those are, and what those that are experiencing success are doing differently. If the public good is to sustain companies with broken business models, it must be accepted that this tilts the industrial playing field to the disadvantage of those trying to create sustainable, independent, and trusted models. If, on the other hand, the public good the government is trying to support is a nation of well-informed citizens, an entirely fresh approach is needed. That begins with policymakers developing an industry-wide policy platform focused on 21st century reality that all news media are converging on the internet. Surveys also indicate that a large plurality of Canadians worry that media dependence on government negatively impacts objectivity. Since 2018, trust in news in Canada has been in decline. Correlation is not always causation, of course, but this coincides with government funding of news organizations.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Peter Menzies. Peter Menzies is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He has a long tenured career throughout journalism. He was a chief editor-in-chief for the Calgary Herald, as well as other positions. He has covered sports. He has covered Olympics. He was with the CRTC for 10 years. The list goes on and on and on as to how credentialed this person is. Needless to say, he's an expert when it comes to speaking on this topic. And hearing him say, sooner or later, news organizations will run out of other people's money, that's probably the best characterization of what's going on right now as you can probably summarize. Because they are spending other people's money. And when you're spending other people's money, it becomes abstract. And this was supposed to be a temporary initiative. Temporary until what?
It seems to me that the vast majority of media outlets are getting direct funding from government. So isn't it inevitable that this would impact their objectivity?
Well, we listened to the opening statement from the Canadian Media Guild, which implied very strongly that the majority of newsrooms in this country are government subsidized, directly or passively through tax credits, through the Qualified Canadian Journalism Organization tax credit structure. So where is the incentive to hold the government to account if your newsroom is reliant on the government for its survival? Because of the government subsidies to failing news organizations, these organizations are not experiencing the market correction I think they so rightly deserve. They are not innovating because the government is hindering that innovation through subsidies.
So Sheila Gunn Reid from Rebel News, folks, and she presented herself very well, and she spoke very well at committee, so hats off to her. And she talks about what the big problem is, and this is what Peter Menzies also talked about in his statements. What is the incentive to criticize the government when they're the ones literally keeping you in business? And this is the whole concern. And this is the argument that Peter Menzies presents when he says, listen, the minute we started subsidizing independent media, so-called independent media in this country, public trust in that media started to go down. Sure, correlation is not causation, but you can use some intuition and some deductive reasoning to figure out why that might be the case. And I don't think you can come to a different conclusion. She also makes a second really good point here, and this is what I was saying earlier. It's what people have been saying for decades. The news organizations are not innovating, meaning they're not coming up with new ways to deliver their news, new formats, new ways of presenting it, other ways to ensure that they're attracting customers, because they had a captive audience for decades. They didn't have to innovate. But all of a sudden, market disruption came. And market disruption, it always comes to any industry that's out there. It's just a matter of time. Something, someone, some type of product gets introduced and it completely disrupts what the market is actually doing. And the market shifts to adapt or correct to that new disruption. Well, the new disruption was independent media organizations and independent media channels like Northern Perspective and many others out there. And the response to this by CBC and CTV and Global and the rest of them is, well, I know, we'll just get more money so we don't have to change the way we do business. And the people that are paying for that are the same people that actually don't want to watch them. That's the irony in all of this. The same viewers that you've lost, that they've said, I don't want to watch this anymore, they're going to get your money anyway.
You formally argued that the challenges facing journalism are often misdiagnosed, that the issue is not simply revenue loss, but changing audience behavior and relevance. You've also argued that the media may overestimate the degree to which the public is engaged with its internal challenges and have been consistently skeptical of government intervention as a solution to the sector's challenges. What, in your view, is the appropriate, if any, role for the government in ensuring the survival of local and public interest journalism?
Thank you. Yeah, the main role should be to develop a truly national news industry policy. Right now, the problem is that they're kind of hopscotching. There's broadcasting over here, there's independence over here, there's newspapers here, and there's broadcasting. There's really no such thing anymore as in the news industry as separate. Broadcasters produce text news, newspapers produce video and audio. And right now, every time the government tries to address one problem, it creates an imbalance elsewhere. You give the CBC $150 million and it's a commercial competitor, you're actually tilting the playing field against non-CBC competitors. You throw money at newspapers, you're tilting the field against broadcasters. You counter that with doing broadcasters. This is a crazy way to do things. If you really want to get a good outcome, you have to understand and look forward into the century that this is a single industry as news, and then build public policies to support that. And one of my recommendations, there are several in the paper, but one of the key recommendations is go ahead and subsidize the consumer, not the producer. There's no point in subsidizing production of something that's not getting consumed.
This is a phenomenal point and suggestion by Mr. Menzies, and it's one that we have floated as well. But he kind of brings the extra justification in at the end. So the challenge right now is that we are being forced, whether we like to or not, fund these different news organizations that we don't even consume. That's not right. So what he's saying is, listen, you can actually still fund these organizations, but bring it back to a free market competition. How do you do that? Well, you say to everybody, all right, whether you're CBC, CTV, Global, or independent media, whether you're Rebel News, whether you're National Post, whether you're Northern Perspective, or whomever, everybody has the opportunity to compete for the same viewers. Great. And we will give you funding, but in a different way. If you can actually secure these viewers and the fee that you charge to actually consume your material is paid by those viewers, we will then pay the viewers directly. That's where the taxpayer money actually comes into play. So you actually get a quote unquote refund on the news subscriptions that you're actually using. And that way, the media still actually gets that funding because they're getting it from the consumer choice, but you're not going to be subsidizing these news organizations for viewers that will never ever watch them. And that forces these news organizations to get back to innovating, to get back to coming up with a new way to attract customers, and they are forced to actually contend with the issue that viewers don't trust them and they have to earn the trust back. They don't just need the trust of the government and the money from the government, they actually need the trust and money, ironically, crazy idea, from the customers themselves. And I think this is a very, very smart way to level the playing field. It will add bureaucracy to the government in managing this, but I'd rather that and have an innovation spurred free market when it comes to the news, the news landscape in Canada, than just handing out money to the CBC when all they do is lose money and they do a terrible job at managing their business.
Mr. Menzies, one of the things that you said in an interview with The Hub, and I'll quote, you said the era of a free, independent, trusted media in Canada is finished. That's quite a bold statement. And so I would like to ask you to explain why you draw this conclusion and what the implications are.
Well, the industry is no longer independent. It's largely dependent on government subsidies at the moment. In Quebec, almost 100% of newsrooms between provincial and federal subsidies are done. So the image of independence is gone. What once was, I tried to put it recently, what once was sacred, this detachment between media and government, and that relationship should never be cozy, and it should never even have the appearance of cozy. It should always be, if you're going to default, it should probably be to steal a phrase from somebody else, it should always be bad in terms of that cordial, but it shouldn't be cozy. So that's sort of ended the image of independence. And that's not to insult any journalists. They may be pure as the driven snow, but the public doesn't see them as independent anymore. And once you've lost that connection with the public, then you're really, that era has ended. And we're now in a new era. It's sort of it's an interesting new world. And if we continue down the path that we're on, as I tried to point out, the demands for this subsidy, the strengthening of this bond between journalism and government is only going to grow stronger. And as it grows stronger, public faith in both institutions is going to decline.
Some phenomenal points that Mr. Menzies raises here, and I'm so glad that he was in committee, because he's not speaking from a partisan perspective here. He's speaking from a data and an experience related perspective. So the fact that he says, listen, the more that you fund media, the more cozy that relationship gets. And I love the fact that he said that the relationship between media and government is supposed to be bad. Cordial, but bad. What does that mean? Democracy only works if there is a free press whose job is entirely almost like the official opposition. But they're essentially the eyes and ears of the average Canadian. So what their job is their job is to hold the government account, to hold politicians to account, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to push for answers, and to never take a side. That is the role of independent journalism. So the more you end up funding these journalistic outlets, that's not journalism anymore. It becomes state propaganda. Now they can jump up and down and say, well, we're not. Well, even if you're not, the problem is you've created the perception that you are. And perception can be as real as reality for people. And once you've lost that trust, it's almost impossible to get it back. And he talks about journalists. I have no doubt that there's some great journalists out there. We've made some comments on some of them. But the issue isn't just the journalists. It's the editors, and it's the executives, and the producers, and all of these other people that have their hands in these stories. And we need pure journalism back. In a conversation with one of our colleagues the other day, I said, listen, all journalists have bias. We have bias at Northern Perspective. It's just how it is. But the great journalists that do have their bias will never let you see it. That's the difference. And we used to have that in Canada. We used to have news anchors and reporters and journalists, and you wouldn't be able to tell what their bias actually was because they made sure to check that at the door. But now it's very apparent to see where the bias actually leads. And that's a problem when the whole goal of journalism is supposed to inform Canadians and hold the government to account.
One of the things that you also said during that interview is you commented exactly on this with regards to public trust toward media. And you made this statement that subsidies fuel a trust deficit. An erosion of trust could lead to a growing group of people drifting toward unprofessional online news sources was one of the things that you stated at that time. Do you care to expand on that?
Yeah, there's been a fragmentation of the marketplace, which is pretty obvious to most people. One of the difficulties with it is you have to shop around these days. If you're inclined to the right of the spectrum, there's a number of advocacy journalists, organizations, I would call them, that you can go to where you can get your opinions reinforced. They can also, produce some fresh news, but it's unlikely you're going to go there. And the same for on the left of the spectrum. There's dozens of them. You're not going to go there and go, gosh, I never thought of things that way before. Or, gee, I didn't know that. Or, that MP that I thought I hated, maybe she's not so bad. Maybe she's not a crazy lady. So there's nothing that disrupts the flow of your predetermined thinking. Unless you shop around. And that's dangerous because you start to get a very segmented society and people start to view people with opposing views as a danger and a threat. And so all of a sudden, those opinions have to be managed. And once you get one government thinking, I need to manage these opinions I find objectionable, then another government's going to come along and manage the other side. So I think it's a very, very dangerous road we're walking down right now.
He's right. Because of the lack of trust in the legacy media, Canadians are now turning to online. There's risk to that, and it can present a lot of problems. Because what Canadians, and not just Canadians, people in general, humans, we like comfort, and we like having our opinions and our thoughts reinforced. It's just a comfortable thing to do. So a lot of times what people will do is they end up finding different sources of media that will reinforce every opinion that they have. This is what the risk of the echo chamber is out there. And what ends up happening is you end up having all of these beliefs, all of these opinions reinforced, whether they're correct or not, whether they're true or not. And what ends up happening is you end up driving a wedge even further between people with different opinions. And that can be a problem, especially when we talk about, on the conservative side of things, where we point our fingers at the liberals and we say, listen, they have introduced so much division in this country. They demonize people who, did or didn't take a vaccine. They demonize people, who have certain opinions or they lean a certain way. And that tore families apart, that tore friendships apart, tore workplaces apart. We can all agree that's not good. But it can happen on the conservative side as well. When we end up just getting repeatedly fed the same types of high emotion, high energetic material over and over again. And the challenge is people don't even know if it's true. And I don't blame the viewer. How are you supposed to find something that is true? How are you supposed to know? How are you supposed to trust it? Because there are so many sources out there that are completely factually inaccurate, even though they're reinforcing your opinion. One of the ones that has come out recently, it talks about these leaked documents from Washington about Mark Carney. And we've received email upon email upon email about it, asking us, is this true? Well, the problem is it's not our job to police other YouTube channels and to tell you whether or not something is or is not true. But the issue with this particular one is people are believing it despite the fact that they don't show any documents in the entire video. They don't show any sources in the entire video. They don't show any sources in the description. So there's actually zero way for you to actually verify it. So when people come to us and ask if it's true, the response back is typically, did they give you any reason to think that it is true based on verifiable sources? And the answer is no. Even though you want it to be true. We all want the last scandal to come forward that will take Mr. Carney out of power and allow us to start fixing this country again. We all want that. But just because somebody is feeding you exactly what you want to hear, that's one of the first times that you need to sit back and say, do I trust this? Or is this channel, which is all based on an AI, it's an AI voice, clips that have no relevance to the actual material that they're talking about, and it's all AI scripted. That's a red flag. That's why on Northern Perspective, we give you sources. We try and give you facts, then we give you our opinions, and allows you to make up your own mind. And we only use verifiable sources. We don't use X posts. We don't use Facebook posts. Unless it's a member of parliament or somebody specifically in question in the video actually making a post on that. That's the only time it's relevant. Otherwise, it's completely unreliable. So that's why we try to do our best. We're not journalists. But as we say, you should always check yourselves. And if you find yourself agreeing with absolutely everything that we say, you should check that too. Make sure you form your own opinions. We want a Canada where people can sit at the dinner table and have two completely different political opinions and be part of a family and be friends and be work colleagues. We want to get back to that Canada that we used to have, because there's too much rage going on right now. But all of this stems from the core issue of there is no trust in the legacy media anymore. And this is where independent media has had to do its best to step in. And we will continue to do our best. We don't get it right all the time. But when we do get it wrong, we try our best to ensure that we put out a correction either in the comments on that same video or in the next one. So it's really refreshing to hear somebody talk about this intellectually, call out the problem, and really circle the wagons on where this all started as a temporary quote-unquote bailout for media organizations that think that they are too big to fail.